We're almost a week into fiercely renewed protests against the government of Venezuela. There have been thousands that have organized in the capital city, but it goes beyond the capital city. It's across the country. I mean, the protests have never really gone away. For well over a year, they've been going on, but they've come back in a big way, and there's some great reasons for that. Unfortunately, police tactics against the protesters started off brutal and became worse as time went on. And we're gonna give you the details. But you should understand, we're gonna be showing you pictures throughout. Some of the photos are inspiring, the big crowds, but then the sheer amount of tear gas that they're sending into these crowds, the military tactics on display there, fires in the background.
It's amazing.
Some of these photos were made. I mean, thank God for photojournalists that are willing to, as with the protesters, put themselves in dangerous situations. You see grenade launchers being shot off, shotguns firing beanbags at protesters. Now we've got some quotes from some of the opposition leaders in Venezuela who are fighting this ongoing political battle against Nicolás Maduro. Freddy Guevara, the opposition majority Congress deputy speaker, said, "This is a battle of resistance. We will see who gets tired first, us of fighting or them of repressing." And that is a rough battle to wage, because I don't know at this point. And also the opposition lawmaker for one of the opposition parties said, "We went into the streets to protest measures taken by the government against our own constitution and our own democracy. But this time repression was worse than before." And as we showed you, riot police firing tear gas. There was actually a tear gas canister, a video shown in an active tear gas canister in a hospital. Patients who were about to undergo surgery having to be taken out. One infant had to be treated for asphyxiation. So these non-lethal tactics can have lethal consequences, and in fact they already have. One protester was killed on Thursday of last week. Dozens have been wounded. I've read over 100 wounded. Nearly 200 people have already been arrested, many of them students. But let's talk briefly about why we've come to this point. So we've been talking about Venezuela for a long time here. Food shortages. One report said that the average Venezuelan had lost 18 pounds as a result of the lack of food, because there's heavy price controls, the food isn't being produced, there's electricity shortages. But then there's also the actions taken by those at the top, so Maduro and also the Supreme Court. So in a couple of decisions, they basically took away all the power from the popularly elected legislature. There was a huge outcry over that, and they sort of stepped back, but they did it. And that is scary for a country that's supposed to be a democracy, to see them step this far in the direction of an authoritarian or dictatorial form of government. You also have crackdowns on opposition leaders. So Leopoldo Lopez has been in jail for more than 3 years already. It's one of the most popular opposition politicians there, still in jail. And recently, Enrique Capriles was barred from running for office for 15 years. That's the governor of one of the most populous, I believe the most populous region in Venezuela. So at the same time that the legislature is being cracked down on, you now have those who could, I mean, Enrique came within, I believe, a couple of points of ousting Maduro in the last national election. So now they're being barred from running. At the same time, the people are suffering. Money's being pumped into the military. He's armed effectively his own militias outside of the military, a security apparatus that he's armed himself. It's a scary situation.
It is. And so at first, and this is prior to the more dictatorial moves under Maduro, I actually felt a little bit of sympathy for Maduro, because he was elected into office after Hugo Chávez. And keep in mind that Chávez is the person who kind of crafted the beginning of an economic situation that was destined for failure. Now, there were a lot of different factors into why Venezuela's economic situation became so dire. It kind of started off with an over-reliance on oil, and also an over-reliance on imports, as opposed to industry exporting goods to other countries. And so you have this one industry that you rely on for all the money, and then oil prices go down, and then what happens? And then also keep in mind that even though I think that social programs to help the poor are incredibly important, I favor them tremendously, okay? I do want to add that, there is a way of going too far. So you have countries like Saudi Arabia, for instance, that also rely heavily on oil, but they also save money in case oil prices go down. Venezuela, unfortunately, did not do that.
Yeah.
And so since they were spending so much money on social programs and helping the poor and not really saving enough for when oil prices go down, then all of a sudden the economic situation just kind of explodes. So it kind of started off like that, and I felt a little bit of sympathy for Maduro simply because he was the one who inherited, this economic system that again was destined to fail. But then he decided to dig himself into a deeper hole, and then he refused to let go of power, and that's what we're seeing here.
To make necessary reforms as well that could have avoided some of this.
Exactly, he did not make the necessary reforms, kept digging that hole deeper and deeper. People are hungry, people are desperate, you see this uprising, and then he continues to dig that hole even further. And so what he's doing here, and what those in power are doing in regard to barring people from running because they know that that individual is more likely to win in upcoming elections, is disgusting and devastating. And then add the fact that right now Maduro is in Cuba, right?
Yeah.
And he's meeting with, sorry if I'm stepping on your toes, I don't know if you were gonna mention this part, but he's meeting with essentially the Latin American version of NAFTA. It's known as ALBA, and it's like a socialist, social democratic organization. It's like an alliance of various countries. Cuba is one of them. Cuba and Venezuela created this alliance to begin with back in 2004. It does not send a good message to your people when you meet with Fidel Castro. It just doesn't. It's a bad idea right now. And right now a lot of the protesters see it as a vacation. And for those who know what he's actually there for, which is probably some economic help, it still doesn't look good, because what's Cuba gonna do for you right now? You know what I'm saying?
Meeting with the brother, not Fidel.
Yeah,
The
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Raul Castro.
That would have been horrible if he was meeting with Fidel Castro.
I'm sorry. I
he's
misspoke.
dead.
Raul Castro. I apologize.
Hey, look, when things get rough, a seance might be your only option.
Well, let me say something. Let me tell you something. I got to thank you, and I got to thank you, and I got to thank the Young Turks, because I'm learning a lot. Because in all honesty, I didn't even know this was happening, because I've been watching American news.
US media hasn't really been covering
US media, all I knew that happened was Homeland season 7 or whatever it is just ended. I know that Caitlyn Jenner got in trouble for the Pepsi commercial, and
oh, it's Kendall.
Kendall, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, you know.
Why they got to drag Caitlyn into this mess?
Not Caitlyn, Kendall. Yeah. But it's amazing, because what's interesting is, as an Iranian American watching what you guys just showed me, it reminds me a lot of 2009 when there was the protests in Iran after the elections. And the other thing that this makes me think about is, it's unfortunate that we don't learn more about the history of the world, because I honestly don't know what you just said right now about Maduro. I agree with you. Like, I would think to myself, oh, he's a leftist. I tend to lean for the leftist because they're thinking about the people. But then you're right, they're grabbing for power. So leftist doesn't always equal a good thing.
It doesn't.
And we don't. And I was just reading about John Leguizamo, who's doing a show, I guess a new show, where he talks about Latino history in America. And he goes, I never learned that in America. And we don't learn these things in America.
Because we're very self-absorbed as a country. And so right now, if you watch the media, and we try to be cognizant of this as well, because I think sometimes we unfortunately fall into this pattern. We focus way too much on domestic policy or US foreign policy, as opposed to all these other countries that are dealing with unrest, that are dealing with this rise of dictators and just say essentially a power grab. And that's what we're seeing in Venezuela right now.
But you can also learn, I'm sorry, one last thing. You can also learn a lot from these things, because as you're speaking about this, I'm reminded a little bit about some of the things that are going on here. As Trump criticizes the press and tries to delegitimize the press, calling them fake news, as he just puts out executive orders, slowly but surely, we feel like, oh, you could start creeping in that direction. And before you know it, he could say, well, this guy's not allowed to run and this guy's not allowed to run. And then we could, what I'm saying? That's an extreme example, but it is a warning to what we have.
Yeah, you need to learn about what's happening in other countries, just so you don't repeat the same mistakes. And by the way, I just want to clarify one quick thing. The reason why I think it's a little problematic for Maduro to meet with Raul Castro right now is because you have a situation in Cuba where anyone who disagrees with the government, if there's any dissent, they get shut down immediately. There's some serious ramifications to that. And Maduro is following suit. He's using the same type of tactics in his own country. And so that doesn't send a good message to your people.
Exactly, yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, look, we want to see this sort of activism, both in the US where it's necessary, but also you're seeing it here. and with much more threat of violence. People have already died. People are being locked up. At any time, the death toll could rise. I mean, if the police are given an order, if the situation spirals out of control, I mean, they're facing really harsh circumstances. And it's not the first time. I mean, we covered a couple of years ago the student protests in South America as well. There's a history of this sort of activism at the risk of your own life to try to change things, and things desperately need to change there.
Our reporter Jordan Chatton broke the Donna Brazil story. He was right, she just apologized for it. Help us get more reporters like that. You're the one responsible for that. Thank you, and let's do more right now at tytnetwork.com/go.